You're listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA Stories, a podcast that celebrates the wisdom, courage, experience, and joy of individuals in the queer community. Every week, we feature a guest who has a remarkable story to tell about their coming out and the life they've lived beyond. Now here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzel.
Hey, it's Anne-Marie Zanzel here. Welcome back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond. I'm so excited to welcome Mistress Cas back to the show today. She is the intersectional educator, therapist, and scientist from San Antonio, Texas. She is a queer polyamorous slut who aims to advocate for sex-positive cultural practices in all settings. She works as a therapist for Respark Therapy Foundation and provides education and trainings on various mental health, relationship health, and sexual health topics to diverse individuals and healthcare professionals. Mistress Cas, welcome back for the second time on the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you. So if you want to learn a little bit about Cas's story and her own queer story, please listen to the episode before this one. So Cas really specializes in polyamorous relationships as well as kink. And so we had such a great conversation last time, we didn't get to kink. And so now here we are. And so if you want to know a little bit more about her story and where she's coming from, please listen to the episode before this. But now let's talk about kink. All right, Cas, what is kink?
So kink is kind of what people think of as that like BDSM thing, which is that, bondage, domination, submission, that spicy kind of stuff. But kink is more of a larger umbrella term that encompasses all sorts of like alt sexual relationship styles. So, things from like furries all the way to like BDSM kind of stuff.
So I have found that when people come out later in life, that a lot of times they really get involved in kink culture for a while. Can you talk a little bit about the barriers to kink culture at first, and then what happens for people as they enter into the culture, which I'm sure has rules and regulations, or does it? I don't even know. I'm not really involved in that culture too much, except for light stuff. So I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, first, it's not always a culture thing, lifestyle thing. Sometimes it's just bedroom stuff. And if that's where you want to keep your kink, that is absolutely fine and valid. But yes, I am from more of the lifestyle culture of kink. And when it comes to getting involved in that, there's some issues. We don't have it as public facing sometimes because of all the stigma wrapped up in kink. It wasn't long ago that sadism was like a valid diagnosis for a mental health disorder. And so, we still try to like move past that, but we still deal with stigma and trying to keep ourselves safe. So, there are ways to get involved in the culture lifestyle of kink, but they're just a little more below the surface sometimes. But one of the great things about like being gay or queer and kinky is like a lot of the kink circles in America anyway are founded within queer culture. So you might, coming from that end, you might find more easily accessible kink stuff than maybe your normal cis het kind of couple that you think of.
Okay, so first of all, you mentioned sadism. And so I think I know what you mean. Can you say a little bit more about that?
So sadism, my definition would be much more about pain as erotic. Sadism is the giving pain, masochism is the receiving pain usually, but it can also not just be pain. It can be intense sensation in general. Sometimes people are like, oh, I'm a tickle top, and they consider that sadism. And it's like any other label. You can kind of feel it out for yourself, see what it defines for you. People most typically, though, think about a sadist as someone who likes to give pain to others. But it's almost always, in my world, super consensual, negotiated beforehand. There's even aftercare to make sure you come down safely.
So if you're somebody who is like, gosh, I'm really curious about this, like how do you even start exploring that? Like, Like, do you find Facebook groups? I mean, how do you even start to explore? Okay, so let me ask you, when people first come out
Yeah.
in the queer community, there is the vestiges of compulsory heterosexuality where they think sometimes it's just about sex. And then as they start to move along in the journey, they're like, oh, wait a minute, this is so much more than
Mhm.
who I who I have sex with or who I go home with at night. So when somebody is new to the community, they're like, oh, but this is drawing me and I'm going towards this. Um, what are like, first of all, one, how do they find community? Like,
Mhm.
how do you find other people that are, are open to exploring this part of sexuality?
So the number one resource location on the internet for kink culture and community is fetlife.com. But like any social media sort of platforms, there's extreme negatives and extreme positives. Don't necessarily, I would not recommend using fetlife.com to like explore what your kinks are. I mostly recommend it as a way to find in-person or online classes in your local area or over Zoom. There's a great event listing option within FetLife, so you can find that kind of stuff. You can peruse the pictures people post, the writings they post, all that kind of stuff, but you might get like into a rabbit hole where you don't want to be.
Right. Or something could really disturb you, which is not something that you're into. So when you mention, so there's fetlife.com, which I'm assuming is FETlife.com, right?
Yeah, like
right.
fetish. Yeah,
Oh,
FetLife.
fetish. Okay, I got it. Yeah. I was like, first when you said it, I'm like, what is she saying? And then I was like, oh, it's fetish.
Yeah.
Or it's fetlife.com. So that's just, and so what I hear you saying is that if somebody's like sort of curious about this, is to like just go and see what classes are offered and see, is there besides yourself, are there other people that talk about this that you really trust and you think is somebody for a beginner or someone who's mildly curious about this?
Yeah, I have a few colleagues that I really respect and admire, and they all have their different niches. If you're curious about rope, especially Japanese style rope or an artistic way of looking at rope bondage stuff, Midori. Like the alcohol, the green alcohol, Midori. She is fantastic. And kind of like old, like has been around in the scene for a long time, and very experienced. More broad categories of things, Sunny Megatron is pretty great. She's pretty awesome. And then like there's a collective that does classes from various educators, but it's very much more focused on like relationships and mental health within kink and that kind of stuff. Pragmatically Kinking is the group that I really enjoy.
So, are you in the process of coming out later in life? Are you feeling isolated or lost, cut off from friends and family, or just trying to figure out what is the next step for you? Well, I have a wonderful coaching program called Lotus Group Coaching. It is for people who are female identifying, cis or trans, or non-binary folks comfortable in those spaces. And we provide emotional, spiritual, and intellectual support for people who are in the process of coming out later in life. We discuss many things in our community, but what's most important is that you have a community of others who understand. Each one of the coaches in the program have come out later in life, and everybody who is a member of our program is somewhere in the process. So if you are seeking community and you want a soft place to land, go to my website, AnneMarieZanzel.com, and book a connection call. We would love to talk to you. Okay, so before we got on, and I think I mentioned this already, is that I found when I work with people later in life, and also when I was like a newbie myself, I did see a lot of people like they really gravitated towards kink, and they've joined these kink groups. I'm just curious on your professional opinion, is there any, because a lot of times when people come out as queer, they often have a lot of shame at first. Is there any tie to that shame that people may feel in kink? Or is it, am I misreading the situation?
So I think it's more, correlation versus causation kind of thing. I think there's a big correlation between someone maybe exploring their gay side and their, relating to also exploring kink or even like polyamory too.
Mm-hmm.
It's once you get used to thinking about things in a more non-traditional, open, honest, authentic way, you're a little more likely to explore other things too. That
makes a lot of sense.
I think that's why we also see a lot of neurodivergent folks in kink too. It's not necessarily that if you're neurodivergent, you're kinky. It's more that you're just so used to thinking about things in a slightly different way that why not consider this other thing?
Well, that's really interesting because you find a lot of neurodivergent people in the queer community as well.
Yep.
And I think that makes a lot of sense. I never really thought about it that way, that they just start, because you think about things differently. So you're like, I'll think about this differently.
Might as well see. Yeah.
So somebody like you talk about kink lifestyle and like a kink way of thinking. Can you, so this is sounds like it's like you've gone down this road for a while and you realize that it's more than just sexual play for you. It's more than just stuff in the bedroom. Tell me about that. What does that mean for you?
So for me, it means kink is kind of a relationship orientation for me. Kind of like my polyamory is a relationship orientation, and my queer, bisexual, pansexual nature is a sexual orientation. There's similarities there. This is part of who I am. I can't not have like some sort of kinky dynamic in my relationships. And even if there isn't like power exchange, which is like my main thing, I still need someone who is like familiar with those tweaks and inner things of kink culture so that like they flow with me.
Right. And so when you say kink culture, what do you, I mean, so you said it's like an orientation towards you, like, just like, your sexual orientation and polyamory orientation. So if somebody is living what is called like a kink lifestyle, what do you mean by that? So do you mean is that, just, you tell me.
So it could be two things. For me, it's both. It can be outside the bedroom, meaning their relationship is steeped in kink. So it's not just part of their sexy times, it is everything in their relationship. But kink culture can also mean community. And I am steeped in community, kink community. I really enjoy the way people think, but the reason I really identify with kink community and I've made it my home is how focused a lot of these people are on consent. And I really enjoy being around people who just make it an active process to talk about consent. It's not as usual as it should be.
So what I hear you saying is that, like, a lot of times, especially in hetero relationships and sometimes in queer relationships, we don't talk a lot about consent. We don't, which is basically, I would assume what you mean is asking permission before you do something. Is that what you mean? Consent.
Well, that's the simple definition. I have my own definition that is more about that consent is a process of aligning thought, feeling, and sensation. So it's a little more than just making sure we're clear on like, this is okay. Yeah, it's a whole process.
Can you say more about that?
Well, yeah, it's not just, are you okay? Yes. Well, you don't really know that, like, what is okay in your mind, what you're thinking about is what you're asking about is the same thing that's in their mind. You might be using different language, different body language, different nonverbal communication things, and coming from different cultural point of views and like identities, that even if you're using the same words as the other person might, you're not necessarily aligned.
Yeah, I completely get that, because like when someone says, "Oh, I feel so bad today," I say to them, "What do you mean by that? What do you mean by what you feel bad?" Because just because you say that doesn't mean I know what you're talking about. Is that what, like, pretty much
Yeah.
what you're saying? Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, we need to be able to understand that we're on the same page, not just for like the risk reduction point of view of kink and BDSM, but also like we want to have more fun. And to have fun, we need to make sure we're like, have the same goals, the same dreams. We understand each other's no-goes and all that kind of stuff.
So what are different types of kink, Cass?
So mine, the one I enjoy the most is power exchange. Female-led relationship kind of structure. Sometimes it's total power exchange where it's more of a like 24/7 dynamic. Sometimes it's just, bedroom stuff. And that can be all the different role play things that come to your mind, like, different power structures in society, and you're replicating them in a different way in the bedroom or in a sexy way or an essential way, not even sexy. Those are fun to explore. It can be fun to explore these dynamics that are sometimes almost oppressive when you're with one that is not trying to oppress you.
Say more. What do you mean by that? Say more about that.
So, for example, my name is Mistress Cas.
Yeah.
Some people might take mistress or master as something that is like historically traumatizing for them or their culture. And that's also why I don't make people call me mistress. You can call me just Cas, and that's absolutely fine. I don't want to like hurt you in any sort of way.
Right.
But for some people, embracing something in a like kind of similar how like the queer culture has readopted the word queer, because now we're like taking it back from being a bad word. Kind of like that in a way.
So it's a way of taking back the power in a sense by reclaiming a word that used to be a negative, had a real negative connotation to that.
And people do it in different sorts of ways. Things that typically scare you. Maybe it's clowns. Maybe you don't like clowns, but when it comes to an idea of like doing a kinky, sexy thing with a clown, it's like, oh, I hate it, but I love it too. Oh, that might be something that is fun to explore, even though normally you'd be like, ooh.
So if you talk about BDSM, are you talking about more of the D then with the dom? So first of all, like I think I would say bondage, domination, is it?
Yes. So bondage, domination. The S stands for submissive or sadism.
Okay.
And then it can also count for slave too. And then the M is master, masochism as well. They have dual words for them.
Okay. So when somebody gets into kink culture, where often do they start?
So I think it starts with more casual viewing of different things and reading of different things like following an Instagram account of like a more popular educator or collective of educators, or a sex positive brand, like a condom brand or something. That's kind of how people start. Or, porn is the number one sex educator in this world, unfortunately.
Ask, what do you think about that? Porn is like, oh, bad. Some of it,
right?
Yeah.
I think there's definitely ethical porn out there. There is porn where the workers are artists. They're educated on what they're doing. They're educated on risk reduction for it, and they like don't perpetuate harmful things necessarily. There is ethical porn out there, especially when it comes to kink and gay queer porn too. Like we've started to take over the sex worker industry in a like more ethical minded way. So like if you start like, go to the Instagram accounts, start looking up different things like, you're starting to get curious about different things. The next point, maybe even before going to FetLife, is to like pay for more ethical porn that is within the niches you kind of want to explore.
so that you know, I guess to see if it sort of works for you. Would you say that? Yeah, yeah. I would
It's
say
fantasy.
that.
It's fantasy. Like, and
Well,
you don't necessarily have to go for visual porn. You can do the erotica thing. That's
well,
just as good.
every lesbian, like lesbian porn that you is not lesbian sex at all. Absolutely, not like, yes, they mimic some of the stuff, but it's not how. Especially tip number one: nails are never that long. Just not.
Mhm.
They're just
Yeah.
not, because women who make love with other women use their hands and their fingers, and you can't have super long nails if you're going to make love to somebody with, you know, in a very intimate way like that. And so, like, when you see lesbian porn, you always see the women with these super long nails, and it's like, yeah, that's not really how it goes.
And that's why sometimes erotica is a better starting place to, or at least more of an explorative thing. Like if you rely more on your imagination, you have a strong fantasy life in your own head. Erotica written porn is absolutely fine. And a lot of the time too, it's you can find more niches and more like different things and different lengths of the writing either. Like, you know, whatever you have time for.
Yeah, and also erotica lets you use your imagination, which is like the people that you like, you're imagining may look a different way, and then if you saw it on a screen, it might be a different thing. And so, like, what it's wonderful about erotica is that you're a participant in it in a way, because you're able to like use your imagination to fill in the gaps that the writer has left out, like maybe not describing how the person looks or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
So my next question is that shame, like, people are curious about these things, and like, it's so funny because I'm like, in the beginning of this, and we may still cut this, I have to think about it, because I said light bondage, and then I'm like, oh my God, I have my fourth and they're gonna hear this, and we may still cut this. But like, I'm like, you know, I'm like, oh, do I want my kids to know about that? You know, and do I want to share that with them? But also too, like when people like are sort of curious about this, but they have the wall of guilt and or shame that's preventing them. What's your advice?
Yeah. So first I would say, like, that's pretty valid. Everyone struggles with shame or guilt around something. And in this society, we are very sex negative overall. So taboo sex, even worse. And so it makes sense, right? That you would have a little bit of that, like, even if it's not conscious, you might have an unconscious like discomfort with the topics because of just where you come from and that being a risky thing to talk about or be into. If you have decided though, that, you know what, the shame thing is a little dumb, I'm going to move past it. You know, there's various different ways you can start taking like live classes where, and you don't have to like ask questions. You could be silent. You could be the wallflower where you just think and you process for yourself and, you know, push yourself to explore different things in a safe sort of environment. You can even do it via Zoom and change your name, not put your camera on. So you're kind of anonymous. But, you know, still ask a question here and there if you wanted to. Then there's also, you know, you could get a therapist or someone who's more like a shame reduction or a pleasure coach. Those are out there. But also like, think about maybe where your shame comes from. Is it body shame? Is it pleasure shame? Is it sex negative shame in general? You know, a lot of times when I'm working with people, a lot of their shame comes from a very like puritanical Christian fundamentalist upbringing, where all sex, all pleasure is no-go. And they just have to kind of think about relearning that it's okay to want to have pleasure in your life, even if it's non-sexual stuff. And a lot of people struggle with that, but like there are lots of groups out there. There's lots of different classes out there, coaches, educators, therapists that can help you go through those topics if you decide that's what you want.
Okay, so if you're trying to like say you're like, you know what, I really have to go to a therapist to really work through my shame of my conservative religious upbringing, because that's like where all my sexual, I was raised Catholic, so it's sex is bad in Catholicism,
Yeah,
it's just
same.
bad. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It's just bad. And so
Mhm.
if you're like saying, okay, I'm going to go work with somebody, one of the biggest problems with finding a good therapist is that some of them aren't very good. And some of them have unexplored sexual shame, unexplored and homophobia, all kinds of things. They think they're able to do it, but they're not. How do you
Mhm.
find, what are some of the questions? Okay. One, how do you find a good therapist or a coach
Mhm.
to help you through these things if you're really, really intent on doing the work? And two,
Mhm.
if you find somebody, what are some great questions to ask?
Yeah, so I belong to an association, and like my professional alliance belongs to this association, and they have a provider directory. The association is called AASECT, AASECT, which is the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Coaches, Counseling Therapists. It's all that kind of like any sex positive, sexual health based professional, and they have a provider directory. That, and I think you can like go by subspecialty even in that.
Mhm.
So go to AASECT, see if you can find someone in your area within your niche. We have lots of people that have this sort of shame reduction sort of mentality about sex in general. And there's many other organizations and associations out there, but AASECT is the one I recommend. There's also the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, which is, they have a kink aware professionals directory. And that is a good directory if you are looking for specifically like kink aware sort of people. Even if that's not your niche, you just want to make sure they're okay with that, because you have some other thing. That might be a good place to go.
So when you meet this person, what kind of questions should you ask them?
I think it's important to ask where they come from theoretically about sex or whatever your sub issue might be. So how do you approach this XYZ thing?
Mhm.
Or it's okay to even ask your counselor therapist where they come from culturally.
Mhm.
And it's not super common in like basic counseling and therapy for a counselor to be honest about their culture, like to disclose that. It's becoming more and more common because we are starting to be more aware that like we all have our cultural bias, and we want to make sure that like our clients are empowered to call us out on our BS if they need to, but also like make sure we're attuned and aligned on things. But you can ask that. You can ask where someone's comes from professionally, culture-wise. Don't think that that's like a bad thing to ask. They might say no, but like then you might know that that's not the right person for you.
Right. And so if they set a boundary that they're like, I'm not going to talk to you about that, then you can also say set a boundary, and then I'm not going to work with you. And if you can't just
Yeah.
give me the basics of that.
Right.
So when you say issue, Cass, what do you mean by that? Like when you're saying issues, because to me, I'm just going to say that sounds like, oh, there's something wrong with me. And I know you're not saying that. So when you
No.
say issues, what do you mean?
Usually when I say issues, it's whatever you're struggling with. And that's not necessarily a negative. It could even be a strength of yours. You're just not sure how to apply that strength, kind of thing. And it's just a little for you at the moment. So you need a little help on how to, figure out how to apply that strength or weakness even.
Mhm.
It can be a disorder. It could be, a condition. It can be any of these other things too, but you don't need a diagnosis or a like issue that's labeled in the DSM, the mental health manual, to get therapy or counseling or coaching. You can just be like, I'm struggling in this area. I could use some help.
Right, absolutely. And so how do people find you? If somebody is like, oh, I need to talk to her, how do they find you and
Mhm.
how can they reach out to you?
So I go by Mistress Cas, Cas with one S, CAS, on most platforms. I have a link tree that, is boldly Casandra, my name spelled out, because I, put all my stuff underneath there. But, you can find Mistress Cas, Mistress Cas on YouTube, mistress.cas on Instagram. And if you want to reach out, get some coaching or mentoring or consulting, you can always email me at boldlycassandra@gmail.com.
Thank you, Cas. And is there anything that I didn't ask that you would really like to answer?
I think I just want to state that I tend to come from a perspective that most people are queer or kinky or like alt in some form or manner. So if you are like new to exploring kink, don't think that you're like just a weirdo. Like maybe you are, but we're all weirdos.
I love that. Well, Cas, thank you so much for spending an additional half an hour with me to talk about this very, important subject, and that people, and really like enlightening us and letting us know a little bit more about what kink is, and if somebody's curious, that there's lots of different venues they can go and explore it in a safe and healthy way. So thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.